Well, hello. I can see I've got somebody here. Hey, how you doing? It's Julie Hall. Okay, good to see you. Good little orange cat there.
Yes.
There you go. He or she? I bet you it's a he. Anyway, what we'll do today is I'm off topic. I mean, I'm off the day. Usually it's Tuesdays I'm doing this. And, well, I had a little bit of surgery done on my foot. So, and that's why I was unavailable yesterday. So glad somebody can tune in because it's a whole lot better talking to at least another face in the room other than just a blank computer screen. So what we'll do today is, and let me ask you, where are you located, Julie? Where are you? Where are you located? In Springfield?
No, I live in Vermont.
Oh, okay. How far is that away from Springfield? I'm from out of state.
Oh
You're in
yeah,
Vermont.
Vermont is
Vermont,
yeah,
the Green
yeah,
State. No
yeah,
kidding. Wow.
yeah. We
I've been
have a
there
lot of
once.
snow too.
Yeah, I've been there once. I was in
Oh
Quebec and we
really?
dropped down to Vermont. Wow. So are
Yeah.
you let's see, are you in Montpelier or where are you? What's the capital of the state there?
Well, Montpelier is the capital, but we live in Concord, which is just outside of St. Johnsbury,
Cool.
and I work in New Hampshire, so it's
Oh,
two
wow.
states.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got any snow?
Oh yes. I bet we have more than you
I'll
do.
bet you do. We see news from here in Canada and Quebec. They got
Oh,
tons and tons of snow. I'm
it's
on the west
ridiculous.
coast, what we call the wet coast,
Oh
and
yes.
just north of Seattle. And we got ourselves about a foot of snow about a week ago, which is unusual for here, very
Yeah.
unusual. People don't know whether to spin or wind their wristwatch when it snows over here. So we usually get the
Is it
snow of the
still
liquid type, rain.
Is it
But the
still
trees are
there or is it
monstrous,
melted?
just phenomenal. Wow, cool, Vermont. Yeah, I'd say you're a little bit a ways away from Springfield.
Yeah.
What we're going to do today is cover Unit 3 in acoustics. We'll spend this week and next week for sure on this unit, maybe even a third, just depends on how we get through. So we've covered wavelength, frequency, speed of sound in Unit 1. Then we covered the decibel from hell in Unit 2. We spent a couple of weeks there. Now let's put it all together and talk about the most common sounds we hear, like the sounds of speech, the sounds of traffic, noise. These are complex sounds because they are comprised and composed of beaucoup different frequencies. So if we share screen here and look at our good old notes, let's take a look over here and go to the notes. Complex sounds, filters, noise, and speech. Well, almost all sounds we hear are complex. The only times we don't hear complex sounds is when you're in a hearing test listening to tones under a headphone. Pure tones are single frequencies. Okay? Might be 1,000 hertz, might be 2,000 hertz. Either way, it really hurts. Okay? Those are single frequencies. Those are very unusual. Complex sounds are combinations of many different frequencies, and each frequency in a complex sound may have different amplitudes or phases. We'll look at that. Complex sounds can be periodic or non-periodic or a mixture of both. Now, periodic simply means, does the sound wave repeat over time? Let's take a look and see what we can see in our PowerPoint slide here. Blow up this one here, and what you're looking at is a pure tone on top, a pure tone here, a pure tone here, and a mixture of those three frequencies together, a complex sound here. And this one, this complex sound is periodic because even though it looks ragged, it's repeating over time. You can see a pattern to it. Any sound that you can see a pattern in the sound waves, you know it's going to sound tonal. It's going to be something that's going to be tonal. Whereas if you look at a sound wave that isn't periodic, let's go here and escape and look at an example of a sound that's completely non-periodic. Here's another complex sound. You can see a pattern. It's made up of these three sounds together. You put them together, you got this one. That's different. We'll get to that later. Here's another here's a one sound plus another one, plus another one, plus another one. Add them together, you got a complex sound. It's periodic because it repeats over time. And we'll look at some of these later. I just want to show you an example of a sound that's completely non-periodic, just a jumble, if I can ever get there. Okay, let's move over here, slide on down. Here you go. There's a sound with no pattern to it at all on the left. It's a sound wave that's just a jumble. That's called noise. Noise is sound waves that are non-periodic. It's not tonal. It's aperiodic, okay? And in this particular example, you're looking at an example what they call white noise. And when you look at a spectrum, look to the right on the screen and you'll see the spectrum of that waveform. And what it's telling you, a spectrum is a different way of talking about sound. Here you're looking at frequency on the horizontal axis and amplitude once again on the vertical. And this spectrum is telling you that this sound wave is comprised of all the different frequencies at an equal amplitude. It contains everything underneath here, from soup to nuts, from A to Z. Okay? However, if you cross over the border into Canada, you'd say A to Z. So either way, okay? Now if I go back home again, here's our first slide on complex sounds. Here's another way. Now look at, here's a sound made up of an addition of this frequency, 100 hertz, this frequency, 200 hertz, this frequency, 300. And follow the black dots. See how this one's condensed? See how this one's neither, and see how this one's rarefacted. And so what's the sum total? Right here. And if you look here, this one's rarefacted, this one's neither, this one's condensed, and once again, you're here. And this here at C, this one's condensed, neither, rarefacted, and once again, you're here. You're just adding, they're just summing the waves together. But sometimes you're going to get a sound that's, let's see if I can show you here. I think the best way for me is just to give you an example here. I'll give you an example of a sound that kind of kicks in and out of phase all the time, which is really weird. And we'll come back to that one too in just a bit. Here you go. Let me blow this one up. Okay, we'll make it larger. And when you're looking at this sound here, it's a complex wave, and it's made from this frequency and this frequency. Put them together, you got the wave. But if you add two tones that are really close together in frequency, really close, then you're going to get something really weird happening. You're going to get like the windshield wipers on a bus. And have you ever watched windshield wipers on a bus? They really bug me, okay? Because they don't do this like a car windshield wipers do. Oh no, when you're riding a city bus, they're going, they're completely out of phase, and then after a while they'll be completely in phase again. But one's always going a little bit faster than the other one, until finally they're completely opposite and out of phase. When two sounds are played that are close together, like if you played a 1000 hertz tone and a 1001 hertz tone, they're only 1 hertz different. They'll mostly be going in and together, the sound waves, but after a while, they'll be completely out of phase, and then after a while, they'll be completely in phase. And when that happens, you hear beats. Wow, 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 wow. So if you played two tones that are 1 hertz different, you'll hear 1 beat per second. Wow, 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 wow. You play a 1000 hertz tone and a 1002 hertz tone, you'll hear 2 beats per second. Wow, 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 wow. 1000 hertz tone and 1005. Wow, 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 wow. Until finally your ear can resolve the two differences between the frequencies. Weird, huh? Anyway, we'll go on to our notes because I'm getting off key here. Let's go share screen, back to the notes, escape here, and look at the top of our page. Periodic sounds have sound waves that repeat over time. Any sound wave that repeats over time is tonal. Until now, we've discussed pure tones. And pure tones hardly exist in nature, but are produced in labs and by audiometers. All simple sounds, for example, pure tones, are, of course, periodic. Now let's look at our second section, spectrum versus sound waves. Spectrum, there's two ways of showing sound, and I'll stop sharing for a second here so we really get to see this. When you think of sound waves, think of a loaf of bread. Okay, just the loaf of bread. When you think of a spectrum, think of a slice out of that bread turned sideways so you can see the raisins. That's really how to think about a spectrum. It's a slice of sound waves. So if you have a complex sound wave, a raggedy old sound wave, and you took a spectral slice of it, you'd be able to see exactly what frequencies are in that sound wave. So spectrums are really good at telling you what frequencies are in a sound wave. Now I'll show you a picture of a spectrum here just so you can see it, because they're quite common. And by the way, in our field, this is usually how we talk about sound, is in terms of spectra. So I'll go to here. Here's a spectrum. In this particular spectrum, you're looking at a whole bunch of frequencies, 100 hertz, 200, 300, 4, 5, all the way up to 1,000. And you can see that they decrease in amplitude as the frequency gets higher. They don't have to. It's just in this particular complex sound, when they did a spectral slice of it and turned it sideways, these were the frequencies inside. You might have a broadband spectrum like this. This spectrum here has everything in it that's under the line here. Instead of showing you discrete individual frequencies, this one here is saying, hey, this sound has everything under here. And it's at this amplitude right here. Look at this spectrum. This spectrum says, hey, this complex sound has everything in it as well. But the amplitude of the low frequencies is less than the amplitude of the higher frequencies in that case. Okay? All right, so now let's talk about, let's get out of here and go to our notes and read exactly what we said. Spectrum versus sound waves for representing complex sounds. Those are the two ways to represent sounds. Each one has its limitations because they only show 2 dimensions of sound. And sound has 3 dimensions. It takes place with frequency, intensity, and time. But last time I looked, a piece of paper only has 2 dimensions, length and width. So you can't show all 3 dimensions of sound on one graph. You're going to need to show 2 different things in order to include the 3 dimensions of sound. So we use sound waves and we use spectra. Sound waves, amplitude is on the vertical, time is on the horizontal, or wavelength is on the horizontal, and spectrum, amplitude once again on the vertical, and this time frequency on the horizontal. Remember, sound takes place in frequency, intensity, and time. Sound waveforms, the axes are time and amplitude. Sound waveforms are good at showing tiny changes in sound over time, but it's difficult to pick out specific frequencies. In other words, what do I mean by that? If I showed you this slide here and said, oh, hey, yeah, Julie in Vermont, look at the bottom over here on D. What frequencies are in there? And if I were you, I'd be scratching my head going, I don't know. How would you know? Okay, you'd have to be doing this. What's the length of sound time here? Oh, if that's 1 second, how many bumps do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I guess 7 hertz might be in there. But look, the wave is jagged. So it's got to have more than just 7 hertz. What are the other ones? And I'd have to say, I don't know. Don't have a clue. How would you tell? You can't. It's difficult. Okay? A spectrum is much better at showing you what frequencies are in the sound. Now, there was a guy who lived in France, and his name was Monsieur Fourier. F-O-U-R-I-E-R. I'm just telling you a story here. And Mr. Fourier was a scientist, and he discovered that sounds were made of individual frequencies. What he did was he took a whole bunch of tuning forks, like these, a whole bunch of tuning forks. He had all these tuning forks hanging up on a line. Just had them all hanging up on a line. Then he banged a big gong like a bell. Boom! And he waited to see which tuning forks started vibrating. And some tuning forks might vibrate with the gong of that bell played about a foot away, but maybe this tuning fork didn't vibrate at all. And maybe this one did vibrate, but this one didn't vibrate at all. So he figured out, that gong of the bell must consist of that frequency and that frequency. The one that made the ones, whatever tuning forks wiggled, resonated, whatever ones were going with the gong of the bell. I guess the gong of the bell must have those particular frequencies in it and not those other ones. So he was the first one to make what they call a Fourier analysis. And a Fourier analysis is a spectrum. It's the same thing. He was the one that came up with the concept. You know what? Sounds are made up of individual frequencies. Now, this is in the 1700s, around the time USA became a country, 1770 something. I don't know, way back when, okay? A Fourier analysis is like a spectrum. So he's the one that came up with the concept that sounds are complex and they are made up of individual frequencies. Let's read let's read another set of lies here. Here, let's look at the notes. So when we look here, sound waves are good at showing tiny changes in sound over time, but it's difficult to pick out specific frequencies. Many sounds are mixtures of both tonality and noise. For example, speech. Now I put a star by that one, okay? Speech is a complex sound made up of tones and noise. And look at this. Look at the line below. Vowels and voiced consonants are examples of tonal sounds that also have noise. And consonants themselves, I'll stop sharing and we'll just talk. Say the word speech. Speech. E is tonal. A, U, O, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y are tonal. Vowels are tonal, and they're louder, and they're low-pitched. Give an example of noise in speech. Sh, s, f, t, k. They don't have any tonality. They're pops and fizzes. They're noise. Okay? So speech, when I say the word speech, the tonal part is E, and the noise parts are ch. Okay? And consonants are noise. And consonants are high-pitched. And they're soft. When you say the word or yell the name Paul, hey, Paul, what's the loudest part of the name Paul? Ah! The P isn't very loud. It's really soft. If I say the word church, let's go to church. What's the loudest part? The softer parts are ch, ch. Okay? Speech. The loud part is E. The soft part is ch, ch. And elderly people have trouble hearing treble. When you can't hear treble, you can't hear the consonants. And consonants tell you what the words were. Dishes or fishes, kittens or mittens. Okay? Oh, you young people, you guys mumble these days. People just don't go to school and learn their diction. Well, it's true. Young people do mumble. A lot of people mumble. Not just young people, lots of people mumble. They don't talk clearly. When you ever sat on an airplane and you're cruising, you're landing, and then the person says, please remain in your seats until the captain has turned on the seatbelt. Remember, blah, 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 blah. And there's yak it away, until the captain has brought the plane to a complete stop at the terminal gate. Blah, 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 blah. Why don't they just say, Please stay remaining in your seats until the plane has come to a complete stop at the terminal gate, because shift happens and maybe the suitcases will fall down. Be careful. See, elderly people don't need us to yell. They just need people to slow down a bit and let them see you and kind of use their hearing aids and just slow down a bit. But the other side of the coin is elderly people do, D-O, do have high-pitch hearing loss. They can hear the bass, they can't hear treble. When they can't hear treble, they don't hear the birds, they can't hear crickets, and they can't tell what the words were. Hat, fat, bat, sat, cat, they've all got but the tells you what the word was. When you think about it, how many vowels do we have in English? How many words do we have in English? Thousands. Every word has a vowel. So vowels don't tell you jack about what the word was. It's the letters that surround the vowels that tell you what the words were. And those are treble sounds. So speech is a complex sound made up of tonality and noise. And what's tonality? Vowels. What's noise? Consonants. Okay? And which is louder? Vowels. Which softer? Consonants. So it's looking at that aspect of speech, okay? And it's a very important concept to internalize, because this is what the HIS field is about. It's all about amplifying speech. Speech is the most important complex sound for human beings to hear. And that's why it's so uniquely interesting that the outer ear resonates with what sounds? The high frequencies. It's like nature was making us more able to hear the soft, high-pitched consonants. It's like the ear was made for speech. Probably if we didn't talk, our ears wouldn't have this shape. The shape of the outer ear, the length of the ear canal, all of those things make a particular resonance. And that resonance is between 1 and 4,000 hertz. And that's where the consonants live, right between 1 and 4,000 hertz. So this is the story of complex sounds and speech. So let's read what we've said here. The spectrum, frequency spectrum. These are the axes are frequency on the horizontal, amplitude is the vertical, and a spectrum is good at showing you specific frequency components of the complex sounds, but you can't see changes over time. Sound waves, you can see changes over time, but you can't tell what's in the wave. It's hard to tell what frequencies. But when you're looking at a spectrum, well, shoot, where's time on here? I don't see it. This is frequency, that's amplitude. Time isn't even listed, okay? Whereas a sound wave, the horizontal is time. So sound waves and spectra are two different ways to represent sound. Each has its advantages and disadvantages, because each one shows 2 dimensions only, and sound has 3 dimensions. So we need 2 different kind of graphs to show all 3 dimensions of sound. Good. Read along. And here I wrote it in italics. Think of sound waves as a loaf of bread. Spectra are the slices to turn sideways. Okay? Then you'll see this heading here, line versus continuous spectrum. Here's a line spectrum. Here's a continuous spectrum. Line shows individual components, individual frequencies. Continuous spectrum say every frequency is in here. Not here. You have 100 hertz. You don't have 150. You have 200. You don't have 250. You have 300. You don't have anything here. You have 400. Okay? So, and the thing to note about a spectrum is that the lowest frequency, it's called the fundamental frequency. The lowest frequency in a spectrum is the fundamental frequency. The other frequencies are harmonics. In this particular line spectrum, 200 hertz is a harmonic. 300 hertz is another harmonic. 400 hertz is another harmonic. And in sounds like these, harmonics are equal multiples of the fundamental. 100 hertz, 200 hertz, 300 hertz, 4, 5. Okay? Continuous spectrum are saying everything is in here. Continuous spectrum are most commonly used in our field. Let's look at our notes and make sure we're sticking to Snickers here. All right, look at this. Line spectrum shows discrete sinusoidal component frequencies. Continuous spectrum shows all frequencies over a region. Noise has a wide continuous spectrum. Pure tones have a very narrow line spectrum. Fourier analysis showed that all complex waves could be divided into their individual component frequencies. So spectrum of sounds are also called Fourier analysis. Fundamental frequency, it's the lowest frequency in a complex sound. In a periodic complex sound, harmonics are equal multiples of the fundamental. In a periodic, here we go. Okay, 100 hertz is tonal. 200 hertz is tonal. 300 hertz is tonal. So in a complex periodic wave, okay, a wave made up of pure tones, your harmonics are going to be equal multiples of the fundamental. In noises, it's containing everything in here. Everything is in there. Now we're adding frequencies together here. Before we jump there, let's make sure we've got that. So in a periodic complex sound, harmonics are equal multiples of the fundamental frequency. For example, a spectrum of sound with a fundamental frequency of 100 hertz has multiple harmonics of 200 hertz, 300 hertz, 400, when those are all equal multiples of the fundamental frequency. Let's go to another section right here, and let's look at this really weird section. Look at this. Square waves, triangular waves, sawtooth waves. Yikes. Okay, let's look at that, just for fun. So here is a wave. Here's a spectrum of that wave. It happens, I guess, to be 200 hertz. Here's another wave, and its spectrum is 400 hertz. Here's another wave, and its spectrum is 600 hertz. And a fourth one, its spectrum is 800. Add them all together, 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 4. You got 4 different sounds. Here's the fundamental. Another multiple of the fundamental, another multiple of the fundamental, another one. Adding them together, you can add the spectra together to get this bottom spectrum, or you can add the waves together to get this complex waveform. Waveforms on the left, spectra on the right. Now, let's see what happens here. Look at this one here. Here's a sound wave made up of these 4 frequencies. And watch what happens when we took away the fundamental frequency. The sound wave got a little bit different. But yet, these big peaks are quite similar. The wave is quite similar in overall sound, even though you removed one of the frequencies. It's because all the equal multiples here are still 200 hertz apart. These are all 200 hertz apart. So these big peaks are 200 hertz. And these big peaks are 200 hertz. Even though the fundamental is removed, the harmonics are still 200 hertz apart. We'll look more at that mañana in a later section, but not now. Here's a sawtooth wave. Check this puppy out. You could cut logs with this thing. So what the Sam Hill is a sawtooth wave? Well, it's a sound wave that looks like a sawtooth. It's a complex wave that is called a sawtooth wave because the shape resembles the teeth of a saw. How did they build that? Well, they added this frequency. They added this one. When they put S1, sound 1, and sound 2 together, you got this. complex sound 1 made up of sound 1 plus sound 2. Add a third one, and now you've got complex sound number 2 made out of sound 1, 2, and 3. If you kept on adding sounds that increased in frequency according to a certain rule and decreased in amplitude according to a certain rule, you'd get a real sawtooth wave. In other words, if you took this fundamental frequency and then you added a harmonic and another harmonic, and notice how the drop in amplitude occurs. Now, please don't think you have to memorize any of this. I'm just telling you a story here. This is just, check this out, okay? I'll say check, like CZ or CZECH, like Czechoslovakia. Check this out, okay? Here, watch. I'm adding the next frequency, its amplitude dropped by a lot. I'm adding the next frequency, its amplitude dropped. Adding the next one, its amplitude dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped. If I followed that rule, okay, I'd end up with a sawtooth wave. Now look at this one here. A square wave. If I added this sound and this one and this one and this one, if I added these two together, I'd get this one. If I added another one here, I'd get this one. If I added yet another one, I'd get this one. Can you see how they're starting to turn square? If I kept adding sounds according to a certain rule, whatever that rule is, according to this rule here, this harmonic, and then, don't add the next one. Avoid that one. Wait till the second harmonic. And then don't add the next one. Wait till the next harmonic. And then skip this harmonic, jump to the next one. So if I'm doing the same thing here, but I'm not adding this one, and I'm not adding this one, and I'm not adding this one, and I'm not adding this one, then my wave is going to be square. Doo-dee-dee-doo. And then you can make triangular waves. Okay? And if I followed a certain rule again, dropped this harmonic here, but this one here really dropped in amplitude. Skip this harmonic so you can see its spectrum. Look at the spectrum. Look at this spectrum. Look at this spectrum. They're all different spectra, and you're building complex waves according to a certain rules, and when people play around with that, you can end up with weird-looking waves. So complex waveforms, strange. So here's a sound wave. You're adding another one. You're adding another one. You're adding another one. Look at how the amplitude drops. The frequency increases. You'll end up with a triangular wave. Sawtooth wave. Square waves. Here's the rules. Amplitude spectrum. If we had a built-in lab, you could actually do this yourself. You know, you have a fundamental frequency. You add the next fundamental frequency, I should say the next harmonic, the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one, and look at their dropping in amplitude at about 6 decibels per octave. Now hang on a second, what's an octave? An octave is when you double the frequency. Human hearing is tested at 125, and when you double that frequency, 250, and when you double that one, 500. Double that one, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, and 8. So we test human hearing at 7 different octave frequencies. Memorize what the differences are between octaves and harmonics. Okay? Harmonics are equal multiples of the fundamental. So if the fundamental frequency is 100, the next harmonic is 200. What's the next one? 300. What's the next one? 400. Those are equal multiples of the fundamental. But look at 100 hertz. What's the next octave? 200 hertz. What's the next octave? 400 hertz. What's the next octave? 800. Next one, 16. Okay? That's what I'm saying. Check out the difference. Make sure that you know the difference. All righty. Very good then. All right. And look at the square wave. How did they build the square wave? Well, look at this. They just did the same drop-off rate, but they just skipped every second harmonic. So if you follow that rule, you'd get a square wave. So that's just building complex sounds. A sound wave, a sine, wave. Don't worry about these. Leave these guys alone. Just leave them alone. Just forget them. Here's a sound wave. Here's its spectrum. Here's a sawtooth wave. Its spectrum. A square wave. Its spectrum. A triangular wave. Its spectrum. Noise. Its spectrum. Okay? All of these, except the top one, all four of these are complex sounds. They're made up of additional multiple frequencies. And as you can see, you can make all kinds of complex sounds. And they're not just limited to this. You've got traffic, you've got cars screeching, doors slamming, people talking, music playing. All of those are complex sounds. All right, I'll just get out of here, look at our notes. So please don't think you have to memorize this. I will never ask you that, okay? Well, all I was doing was telling you a story about how complex sounds can be built. Look at the bottom here. Beats. Oh, I like this one here too. Horn. Horn. The horn of your mouth has a radiation effect. I'll tell you what that means, just for fun. I've got a piece of paper. And I'll roll the piece of paper up like a horn. And I'll make the horn wider at one end and narrower at the other end. What happens when I talk into the narrow end? I increase the high frequencies. Listen to how you can hear the letters S, S. If I talked into this end, look at how muffled my speech is. This is kind of what elderly people hear like. Elderly people hear like this. They can't hear the high frequency consonants. So they need hearing aids to turn that frown upside down and increase the treble frequencies. Now your mouth is a little bit like a horn because your voice, your larynx is narrower here, but your mouth gets wider. And in a weird way, your mouth is a little bit like a horn. So the complex sounds coming out of your larynx would have like a 12 dB per octave drop in frequencies as they went up. But because your mouth is a bit like a horn, it radiates and it amplifies the highs a bit. So it offsets the fact that the frequencies drop off really quickly with the octaves. Don't worry about that. It's just, again, just telling you about complex sounds of speech. All right, beats. Now, who likes beats? I don't mean beats of music. I'm talking about beets in vegetables. I can't eat them. I hate them. They're vile. Those purple things, they're just like, some people love them. I just absolutely detest them. And you know what students often do? They give me for Christmas a jar of beets just because they know how bad I hate them. And whenever I get that, I'll open it up in class, I'll open it up and I'll put my fingers in and I'll eat one, I'll try to keep an open mind. I try every time, but oh, yeah. So whoever likes beets, the highest grade you're going to get in this class is a B. Okay, just so I thought I'd tell you. No, I'm just kidding. All right. I can see Julie loves beets. A lot of people do. I'm kind of the weird one here. A lot of people like them. Okay, share screen. Beets. If you add two tones that are far apart in frequency, you'll get a complex sound of two different, distinct frequencies. You can tell a complex sound right away when you see anything other than a pure tone sinusoid. In other words, when the wave has weird bumps on it. As soon as the wave no longer is a sinusoid, as soon as the wave has jiggles on it, you know automatically it's composed of more than one frequency. Automatically. When adding two tones together that are close together in frequency, the whole wave envelope shows amplitude increases and decreases over time. To wit, have a look here. Here's two sound waves. I hate it when that black bar comes down. I wish that thing would go away. Anyway, it's always there, go away. Now, this sound here and this frequency here, look at the spectrum. Two tones far apart in frequency. When you look at the sound wave, yep, it's got bumps in it. So you know automatically it's a complex sound. It's not just doing, follow my cursor, it's not just doing this. Okay, it's doing, yeah. So, but look what happens when you add two tones that are close together in frequency. Now your sound waves are wow, 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 and those are the beats. And that's what I was talking about, the windshield wipers of a bus. On a car, they're kept in exactly the same phase. But for some reason on city buses, you know, I always notice this. One wiper will be a little bit faster than the other. And then finally, you're going to see a more and more of a separation until finally they're completely out of phase. They're doing this. But if you keep watching, then you'll start, I can't really do it, but eventually they'll be totally in phase again for a little while. And then they'll slowly go out of phase again. That's what I mean by beats, okay? If you play a 1001 hertz tone and a 1000 hertz tone, play them together, they're going to at times be completely in phase, and then after a while they'll be completely out of phase, okay? They're close together. So, and if they're 1 hertz apart, you're going to hear 1 beat per second. If they're 2 hertz apart, you're going to hear 2 beats per second. Don't worry about the math, it's just something you're going to hear. And then once the two tones are far apart in frequency, you're going to say, oh, yeah, now I hear 2 separate tones. Oh, okay. But when they're really close together, you'll just hear beats. Weird. And it has nothing to do with the purple vegetable. Okay, I just always use that as a distraction. Let's look at our notes now and get on to the top of the next page. The phases of the individual frequencies add together at times and at times cancel each other out. The result looks like a single tone. Ah, Julie's drinking on the job again. I can see that. As long as you got a little bit of Bailey's in that coffee, we're doing all right. Good stuff. Phases of the individual frequencies at times add together and at times cancel each other out. The result looks like a single tone with an amplitude with bumps. And those are the beats. The beats occur at a rate of the higher frequency minus the lower one. 1001 hertz minus 1000 equals 1. So you'll hear 1 beat per second. 1005 hertz and 1000 hertz are different by 5. So you'll hear 5 beats per second. Enough on that. Forget about that. Let's look at another picture now. And we'll move on. Here you go. These are spectra of 3 different musical instruments. Now look at each spectrum carefully. In this case, they all have the same fundamental frequency, 300 hertz. They all have the same harmonics, 600 hertz, 900, 1200, 1500. They're all multiples of the fundamental, the A, the B, and the C. But they're going to sound different because this frequency here is greater in amplitude. This one here is smaller in amplitude. This one here is kind of in between. Okay, look at this. This frequency has the most. This one has less. This one has less. So what we're showing here is if you could draw a line and follow my cursor. If I could do this, and then down here, and then up here, and then down here, the bumps are the resonances. This might be a trumpet. This might be a clarinet. This might be an oboe. Who knows? Okay? They all may have the same fundamental frequency, but the amplitudes are different. Look at the middle one. It's got a little amplitude here, another little amplitude here, another little amplitude here. So it has 3 rather weak resonances. This one here has a strong lower frequency resonance and then a mid-sized higher frequency resonance. This one here has a strong low frequency resonance and a rather strong high one. And when you think of the 300, that could be, have you ever blown a trumpet? You ever try and make a trumpet go? You put your lips up to the end of the thing, and you're doing that. Okay, we'll call that the fundamental frequency because your lips are probably vibrating about 300 times a second. Okay, that's the fundamental frequency. And then the horn has its own mass and stiffness properties. And those mass and stiffness properties are going to cause resonances at certain harmonics and no resonances at other harmonics. So it's the particular mass and stiffness properties of the clarinet versus the trumpet versus the other instrument. Even though you blew into the end of them with the same lips, with the same that might have been identical, the instrument will sound different because its horn has different mass and stiffness properties. And mass resonates with lows, stiffness resonates with highs, and you're going to end up causing resonances across different harmonics. And that's why certain musical instruments will have a different timbre, a different quality of sound from another one. It's all complex sounds, resonances. It's just good to have sort of a grip as to basically what that stuff is. Good. All right. When the mass, stiffness, when the opposition due to mass is equal to the opposition due to stiffness, that's where you're going to have resonant frequencies. And this is right shown as we showed another time in your textbook. So now let's kind of look at our notes here. Whoops, I want to still keep the notes, but I want to show, the notes, not the PowerPoint. So let's go to here and look at our notes here. Spectrum of 3 complex sounds. That's the one we just showed you. Note how they all have the same frequencies and same fundamental frequency of 300 Hertz in this case. But the amplitudes of each frequency are different. They each have different resonances, which gives a different quality of sound. Recall, resonance, favorite vibrating frequency, is due to mass and stiffness. Each instrument has different mass and stiffness properties, and so certain harmonics are emphasized in amplitude. In musical instruments, the reed or your lips determines the fundamental frequency, and then the mass and stiffness of the instrument determines the amplitude of each harmonic. Recall, resonance is influenced by impedance, which is opposition due to mass and opposition due to stiffness, plus resistance. I'd put a star by that one because that's out of Unit 1 when you looked at resonance and we looked at impedance. Okay? Opposition due to mass, something like a locomotive. You can't jiggle a locomotive. Okay? Mass vibrates with low frequency. Mass opposes highs. Stiffness vibrates with high frequencies. Stiffness opposes lows. So opposition due to mass, opposition due to stiffness, plus the third thing, resistance, which is like simple friction, okay? Because all objects are going to oppose sound that way too. You add up those 3 things, you've got the overall word called impedance. And impedance is what's stopped, resonance is what gets through. The impedance determines the resonance. Okay, so the opposition due to mass, the opposition due to stiffness is like the bouncer at the bar who says, you can't come in, but you can. Not you, but you can. The ones that get through are the resonating frequencies. The ones that are opposed are not. There you go. When you're hot, you're hot. When you're not. All right. Here we go. More than halfway, or you're 3/4 of the way through this lesson here so far. So we're doing good. So that's what all of this stuff is. That's what this whole paragraph is talking about. Spectrum of 3 complex sounds, resonances, impedance. You may recall some of this from Unit 1, and this is your second pass at that. Only now we're looking at it in terms of which sounds, in terms of spectra. You can literally see it in terms of spectra here. The next section of our notes talks about, oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, impedance and resonance of any object through which it travels can be said to act as filters. Now, we've all seen filters. Your vacuum cleaner has a filter. The filter is going to let air get through it, but the filter is not going to let dirt get through it. Speaking of which, when I'm done here, I'm supposed to be vacuuming the rugs. The wife is out at work, and she said, make sure you vacuum the rugs while I'm gone. So literally, I will be using filters, okay? So filters let certain things through and they don't let other things through. So when you just think analogically like that, okay? So you can think of these sounds that I showed you here, and we'll get to the PowerPoint slide here. This is a filter that let this sound through, doesn't let this sound much through, lets this one through more, doesn't let that one through. This filter is really picky. It only lets this frequency, this one here, and this one here a little bit. This filter here really likes this booming low frequency, doesn't like 1800 hertz, stops it from getting through. So in a way, you can look at resonance and impedance like filters. So let's look at types of filters, because you're going to see a lot of this in acoustics and in your field. A low pass filter is something that lets the lows get through, but it doesn't let the highs get through. And then B, you might have a high pass filter. It lets the highs get through, it doesn't let the lows get through. And then you might have C here, a band pass filter. It lets some mid frequencies get through, but it doesn't let really low ones, and it doesn't let really high ones get through. And then the fourth one is like a notch filter. It's letting everything get through except these guys. Now, an example of a notch filter can be seen at hospitals. Hospital equipment doesn't like 60 hertz. It doesn't like that stop 60 hertz because that's the frequency of electricity. Okay, electricity is 60 hertz. So electricity goes on and off, 60 times a second. And that can create a lot of hum in sensitive hospital equipment. So sensitive hospital equipment has a notch filter that cuts out 60 hertz. So when you think about filters, think about resonance, that's what gets through the filter. Impedance, that's what doesn't get through the filter. And some filters are band pass, some are low pass, they only let the lows get through and they stop the highs. Some let the highs get through and they stop the lows. There's all kinds of weird filters, okay? All right, good. So when we look at filters, there you have it. Let's see what we, whoa, not a new share. What am I trying to do here? New share, here, close that one down. New share, why am I touching that? Okay, let's look at our notes here. And what do we have? Impedance in anything can be said to act as filters. In speech, these sculpt and shape the basic buzz of the vocal folds or larynx. Basic buzz. Now, when you think of a buzz, I mean, I think about someone who's stoned or high. Let's get a buzz on, you know. I'll just tell you this. In Canada, dope is legal now. It's legal in Canada. You can walk and stand on the street corner and just, no problem. Hey, cop, would you like a hit? No problem. Hey, anyway, Canada's a funny country that way. So, when you think about filters and things that resonate, how is Julie's voice going to be different from Trisha's? They're both women, but their voices are going to sound different. If you took Julie's larynx and put sound through it, you'd hear kind of a basic eh. And if you took Trisha's larynx, never call it a voice box, stupid name, L-A-R-Y-N-X, larynx. Okay, if you put sound, wind or air through Trisha's larynx, it's going to make almost identically the same sound as air passing through Julie's larynx. What makes Trisha's voice sound different from Julie's is that Trisha's head is different. The size, the mass and stiffness of her skull, the mass and stiffness of her mouth, they're different. Okay, what makes a clarinet sound different from a trumpet? It might be the same fundamental frequency that went in, but what makes John sound different from Matthew, which is going to sound different from Mark, who's going to sound different from Luke? Well, those four guys have different heads. And so the larynx of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John might be quite similar, but the fact that the head is like a horn, and my head is different from another guy's head. So the larynx might be not that different. but the very mass and stiffness of Ted's head is different from the mass and stiffness of Bob's head, which is different from the mass and stiffness of Harry's head. And that's why 3 guys are going to sound different. And that's why 3 women are going to sound different. Just like a clarinet will sound different from a trumpet, even though the fundamental frequencies were the same. Okay? It's the mass and stiffness that determines the resonance. Now, when you talk about a larynx, because we're going to finish up here, when you talk about a larynx, I'm going to take this piece of paper and I'll tear it in half, and then I'll tear it in half one more time. Now watch this. I got 2 pieces of paper. What happens when I blow through them? Notice how they stuck together? They didn't blow apart. They stuck together. Weird. No, that's how the larynx works. The larynx is 2 folds. They close and they open. When you blow air through the larynx, okay, the larynx is open. When you blow air through it, it slams shut, just like these 2 pieces of paper slam shut. And when they slam shut, air builds up underneath, pushes them apart. Air rushes through, sucks them back together again. Air built up underneath, blows them apart. Air rushes through, sucks them together again. The Bernoulli effect. B-E-R-N-O-U, Bernoulli, L-L-I. Okay, Bernoulli. Air going fast through something decreases the pressure. When you think of an airplane wing, I'll show you something. I'll draw the end of an airplane wing. Can you see that kind of sort of? Look at that. So here's the airplane. The air is rushing underneath. Now I know that's not what you're thinking is, boy, he's not drawing an airplane very well. Hey, yes, I am. I'll show you. Okay, here's the airplane. Okay, all I'm showing you is what does the end of the wing look like. Okay, air is going to rush over here faster than it goes underneath because this area has a bigger distance than this area. That's why airplanes fly. It's because the wing has that shape on the top, and the air rushing over the top creates a vacuum, and the plane literally lifts. Okay? And it's the same principle as me blowing between 2 pieces of paper. I'm decreasing the air pressure. And so they're stuck together. And that's how the larynx works. Now, in a male, that larynx opens and closes 125 times a second. So the fundamental frequency of a male voice is 125. A female, a woman's voice, woman's larynx opens and closes 250 times a second. So the fundamental frequency of a woman's voice is 250. And a baby's larynx opens and closes 500 times a second. So the fundamental frequency of a baby's voice is 500. Okay? So, but what makes, so a guy, all the male larynx, 125, 125, 125, about. So what's going to make 2 men sound different is not the larynx, because each of them will vibrate about 125 times a second. It's the shape of the male's head. One guy looks different from another guy, which is different from another guy. Just like the clarinet and the trumpet. Okay? When you think about speech, when you think about the larynx, never think about vocal cords, because that's not true. It's like a triangle that's closed, and then it blows open, and then snaps shut, and then blows open. Air rushes through, sucks it shut. Air builds up underneath, busts. That repetition happens 125 times a second in a guy, 250 times a second in a woman. Weird. This is speech. We'll continue more on speech as a complex sound next week. Where are we in our notes? Just about all wrapped up here. Let's see where we are. Yakety, yakety, yak. So here we go. Impedance, speech. These sculpt and shape the basic buzz of vocal folds or larynx, filtering and resonance properties of your vocal tract. Your vocal tract from your lips down to your larynx is about 17 centimeters long. So the resonance, the filtering resonance properties of each individual's vocal tracts give individual speech quality. Everyone's speech would otherwise sound quite tinny and quite similar. Filters in any good sound transmission system are defined by cutoff frequencies and dB per octave roll-off. We'll continue on this next week. The cutoff frequency here and the dB per octave roll-off. The cutoff frequency here, the dB per octave roll-off. Cutoff, cutoff, roll-off, roll-off, enough on that. So I will stop sharing here and I'll stop recording. And I could just wanted to ask you again, Julie, your cat, is the orange cat. Orange cats are usually male, are they?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
they usually are. And then you can see these other turtleback cats that are kind of mottled, like black and kind of light brown fur, and they're almost always female cats. Can't remember what the name of those cats are, but they have a different.
Tabby.
Anyway, well, that had nothing to do with sound, but that's okay. Cats are very good. So, all right, it's been a slice. Live long and prosper. We'll talk to you later. And yeah, on Tuesday, we'll continue the Zoom session at the normal time of Tuesday at, when is that now? 11:30 Central Time, probably 12:30 by you. You're on Eastern Time, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on Pacific Time. I'm 3 hours behind you. So right here, it's about 5:30 here. So, all right, I got to go vacuum the rug and use the filter. Okay, see you later. I'll stop recording. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.